Over the past episodes, we have been studying bees, in particular the incredible honeybee. But there are many other types of bees, equally important, who also pollinate and make honey, just not in large hives. They live in smaller groups. We call these solitary bees. Let's take a closer look at some of them. We'll start with the most famous and beloved species of all bees, the bumblebee. Bumblebees are black and yellow striped and fuzzy all over. They look like they're wearing a winter coat, and often they are the first bees you see in spring and the last in the fall because of this extra warmth. They are a bit larger than a honeybee. Like other solitary bees, there is no large hive. Let's see how these bees live. Hi everyone! Today I would like to read The Bumblebee Queen by April Sayre and illustrated by Patricia Wynn. The bumblebee queen begins the spring below ground and all alone. Bumblebees are native to North America, South America, Europe, and Asia. There are 250 bumblebee species. She digs out, she flies. Hungry, she seeks flowers. She drinks nectar and with her long, hairy tongue. She begins to search behind the barn, beyond the lake. She buzzes around the bushes, between the fields. Bumblebees rarely sting, but they will sting in defense and can sting more than once. She is looking for a place to build her colony. A puddle? No. A bush? No. An old mouse nest? Yes. Bumblebees nest in the ground or in sheltered, mossy, grassy places such as old mouse nests or abandoned birdhouses. Queens have even nested in teapots. Now she prepares. She visits flowers and drinks nectar. She gathers pollen. She makes a waxy cup called her honey pot. In it she stores nectar that she will eat on stormy days when it is not good weather for flying. The bee's body produces wax that squeezes out in little tiles from between the segments of her abdomen. She pulls off the tiles with her feet, then chews them to form her honey pot. So like honeybees make those honeycomb cells, she makes little things that look like pots. She forms some of the pollen into a lump. She lays eggs in it and adds a wax covering. After the eggs hatch, the queen chews a small hole in the wax covering and pushes in food to feed the larva. In 5 days, the eggs hatch. They are lumpy, plump larvae. No buzzing, no flying, just wiggling. The larvae eat pollen. The queen brings more. The larvae grow, wriggling and chewing. As the larvae grow bigger, the wax covering cracks. The queen repairs it and enlarges it. Then, one spring day, the larvae spin cocoons. The larvae spin cocoons 10 to 14 days after hatching. The outer layers of silk harden and yellow, so the larvae no longer need the wax coverings of the pollen clump for protection. The queen gets rid of the extra wax. But the queen bee keeps working. She collects nectar, she gathers pollen, she lays more eggs. In between her other duties, the queen snuggles up to the new eggs. Heat from her body goes through a bare patch on her abdomen to warm the eggs. Kind of like a chicken, sitting on eggs. In 10 days, the cocoons ripen. The queen chews them open. Bees emerge, wings fanning. Now the queen has helpers. Worker bees are gray when they emerge, but their adult coloring starts to show in a few days. The new workers gather nectar and pollen and feed the larvae. The first worker bees of the season are the smallest. Later in the season, the workers are bigger. This may be partly because as the colony grows, more workers can gather more food for the larvae. Summer simmers, the colony grows, the queen lays more eggs. Some form workers, some form drones. Some will become new queens. Workers are females that are smaller than the queen. Workers do the hive chores. Drones are stingless males whose only job is to mate to help produce next year's bees. A bumblebee colony can contain from 300 to 400 bees. In fall, nights chill and flowers shrivel. New queens and drones emerge from the hive. Scientists aren't sure what signals an egg to become a queen or a worker. Drones from many colonies zoom across the fields, dabbing drops of bee perfume. New queens follow the perfume highway to find drones and mate with them. Workers, drones, and queens all eat nectar. Any extra nectar that is not eaten by the bees right away is kept in honey pots. As water evaporates from the nectar, it becomes honey. The new queens drink nectar, search for soft earth, then dig down to wait for spring. While underground from fall to spring, the new queens go without food, sometimes as long as 6 months between meals. But the workers, the drones, and the old queens stay above ground. They die. They cannot survive the cold. Old bee, queen of the bumblebees, won't see next spring come, but her daughters, the new queens, will fly across the fields and build colonies of their own. In northern Canada, the entire bumblebee season is only a few weeks long, but in the southern United States, like where we are, colonies may last for many months. Near the equator, bumblebee colonies may live year-round. So I like that bee. So you can see some of the differences between bumblebees and honeybees, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So as you heard, bumblebees are a little different than honeybees. Their colonies are much smaller and only last one season, but they still collect pollen in pollen baskets, drink nectar, use wax to build storage for honey, care for their babies and young bees. In a bumblebee colony, all worker bees forage for their own nectar, not just a few like honeybees. And my very favorite fact that I've learned this whole year while researching bees to do these episodes is that the Old English word for bumblebee is Dumbledore. So for all you Harry Potter fans out there, I thought you'd like that. What do you think? Any resemblance? And I do like the fact that both words, bumblebee and Dumbledore, are what we call onomatopoeias, which are words that try to make the sound. So in this case, both words are trying to hum or buzz like a bee. Bumblebee, Dumbledore. I just kind of like that. So moving on. Another solitary bee you see around here is the carpenter bee. They are huge and chubby with shiny black abdomens that look leathery and a yellow fuzzy thorax. They are about the size of a bumblebee, but we consider these destructive because they burrow into wood to make their nests, hence the name carpenter bees. They bore holes into wood on our homes, porches, and swing sets. This is the underside of my patio table, and as you can see, they make a perfectly round hole, and then they climb up inside and build their nest. If you look up carpenter bees online, what you'll find is a lot of advice on how to get rid of them, which is too bad, because these bees pollinate plants other bees cannot, namely cotton, tomatoes, and squash. The pollen in these blossoms is really hard to get at and requires the carpenter bees' big, robust bodies to get it. These bees buzz pollinate, which means that they get inside the blossom and vibrate their bodies to dislodge the pollen. We grow a lot of cotton, tomatoes, and squash in this area, so these bees are important to us. Also, they are the gentle giants of the bee world and really have to be provoked to sting, like if you stick your finger into the nest. So don't do that. The last bee to discuss is the mason bee. Like bumblebees and carpenter bees, they do not set up big hives, but they do pollinate and drink nectar. They are a bit larger than your average worker honeybee, with solid black bodies covered in yellow, orange, or reddish fuzz. The name mason was given to them because masons are builders who work with stone or brick, and these bees burrow into masonry on buildings to build their nests. Here is a mason bee burrowing a hole on my front porch. They dig a hole or find one, and instead of making combs or pots of wax, they make a paste out of pollen and lay eggs in it. When the eggs hatch, they eat the pollen paste while they grow. So the mason bee mother doesn't need to stick around to feed her children. She lays eggs in several holes and caps them with mud, as shown here. The new bees will emerge the next spring. Mason bees are extremely hard workers. Each bee can pollinate up to 2,000 flowers a day. So gardeners who don't have space or time to keep honeybees often provide housing for mason bees like this one. Thank you so much for joining me in this exploration of bee diversity. All bees matter.